1st of 2020. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for being here. Last night was one heck of a night in Bellevue, but I'd like to step back from the moments and talk about our mutual grief and outrage and the circumstances surrounding the death of Mr. George Floyd in Minneapolis on May 25th. The city of Bellevue stands strongly with other cities and peaceful demonstrators across the nation in denouncing the events and the actions that led to Mr. Floyd's death. We hear you and share in your frustration and sadness. Anybody should be able to look to the police for protection without question of whether they will be treated fairly. Our hearts go out to the loved ones of Mr. Floyd and any person lost or impacted by senseless actions, fear, or hate. We have seen too many incidents like this to think that injustice or discrimination cannot happen in our city. We must all be willing to make changes and speak out when necessary because this can happen anywhere. We must all stand together in making a commitment to driving out inequity, supporting equality, and preventing injustice. Our city and our police force have received exceptional training and are acutely aware of social dynamics, integrity, and equality in their actions. Our police chief, Steve Milet, has released his own statement that's available, sharing his dismay at the treatment and death of Mr. Floyd from a law enforcement officer's perspective. The city of Bellevue will continue to serve our community with excellent public service to all and to promote a safe, welcoming environment characterized by mutual trust and respect between our public servants and community members. Bellevue stands strong together. We commit to working hard every day to maintain and continue building that trust and respect, especially during these challenging times. And with that, City Clerk, are you ready for the roll call?
Yes, I am. Mayor Robinson?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Neuenhuis?
Here.
Councilmember Barksdale?
Here.
Councilmember Lee? Councilmember Lee? You need to accept the unmute. Councilmember Lee? I'm going to move on to Councilmember Robertson.
I'm present.
Councilmember Stokes?
Here.
And Councilmember Zahn.
Here.
And I'm going to go back to Councilmember Lee. So, oh, there you are. Thank you very much.
I don't know why. Here, present.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, before the approval of the agenda, there are a couple of procedural items we need to address. Because in-person meetings are prohibited by the governor's emergency order concerning the Open Public Meetings Act, the council will be holding its meetings remotely for an unknown period of time. And as a result, there are several provisions in the council's procedural rules, Resolution 8928, that the council should temporarily suspend. One involves the council's ability to participate remotely, and another involves the process for accepting communications from the public. And in addition, in order to allow the council maximum flexibility to structure its agendas while holding meetings remotely, the provisions in the council rules related to the order of business at each meeting should also be temporarily suspended. Section 13 of Resolution 8928 allows a council procedural rule to be temporarily suspended. When suspension is requested and no objection offered, then as mayor, I may announce the rule suspended. And I'm going to ask the deputy mayor to make the first motion.
Certainly, I move to suspend until such time as the council is no longer holding its meetings remotely. The provisions in section 6.e of resolution 8928 concerning remote participation by council members to allow all council members to participate remotely.
Are there any objections to this motion? Hearing none, it is passed, or the rule is suspended. And Deputy Mayor, could you make the second motion, please?
Certainly can. I move to suspend for this June 1st, 2020 council meeting only the provisions in section 8.d of resolution 8928 concerning oral communications from the public to allow public comment to be provided in writing on the topics on the meeting agenda and read during the council meeting.
Are there any objections to this motion? Hearing none, this motion is adopted and the rule is suspended. And there is a third motion, Deputy Mayor.
I move to suspend until such time as the council is no longer holding its meetings remotely the provisions in the third and fourth paragraphs of section 6.a and all section of 7.a of resolution 8928, which involve the order of business for council meetings.
Are there any objections to this motion? Hearing none, that motion is adopted and the rule is suspended. Thank you very much. All right, we now have our report of our city manager, Mr. Miyake.
Mayor Robinson, I believe we have proclamations prior to that.
Did I miss something? I'm so sorry. Hold on. Hold on. Oh, gotcha. On my wrong page. Okay. So, yes, we do. We have LGBTQ Pride Month proclamation. I'm going to ask Councilmember Zahn to read, please.
Yes. So whereas the city of Bellevue is a welcoming community that firmly believes in the city council's vision statement, Bellevue welcomes the world. Our diversity is our strength. We embrace the future while respecting our past. And whereas it is recognized that the contributions of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning, LGBTQ people, both in our community and nationally, have been critical to advancing equity. And whereas, while further progress is needed towards more equitable treatment of LGBTQ community members, it is important to recognize and celebrate the substantial gains that have been achieved. And whereas today's youth involved in the LGBTQ and equal rights movement have played a critical role in continuing efforts towards a more just world. And whereas LGBTQ youth make up 33% of the unaccompanied youth in King County as measured in the one-night count of 2019. And whereas LGBTQ youth are disproportionately impacted by issues related to homelessness, mental health, and isolation. And these issues have become more pronounced during a time when COVID-19 is present in the community and throughout our nation. And whereas in solidarity with the LGBTQ community, the city of Bellevue will raise and fly pride flags at City Hall and several other city-owned facilities from June 1 to June 30, 2020.
Now, therefore, I, Lynn Robinson, Mayor of the City of Bellevue, Washington, and on behalf of its City Council, do hereby proclaim the month of June 2020 as LGBTQ Pride Month in Bellevue. The City of Bellevue affirms its support and acceptance of LGBTQ youth, adults, and allies within the community. Further, we are proud and supportive of the meaningful, long-lasting impacts the LGBTQ community has made, including community support activities and mechanisms employed during COVID-19, and the many contributions they've made to Bellevue's rich and diverse history and culture. And with an emphasis on creating an inclusive attitude for youth, I'd like to honor the Bellevue High School Pride Club, many of whom are watching from home tonight. Thank you very much, Councilmember Zahn. The next proclamation is our Essential Workers Proclamation, and I've asked Councilmember Barksdale to read that for us.
Thank you, Mayor. Whereas tens of millions of workers in the U.S. are employed in essential critical infrastructure jobs that must continue through the COVID-19 pandemic to maintain the services and functions Americans depend on daily, as well as the country's ability to operate resiliently during the pandemic response. And whereas roughly a quarter to 30% of Seattle metro area employment is made up of workers in essential industries according to federal government data, and whereas essential workers include personnel working in 16 different sectors, such as emergency response, healthcare and public health, food and agriculture, critical manufacturing, information technology, transportation, water, energy, government services, and other support functions for these industries. And whereas many of these workers are required to interface closely with the public in the course of their work, putting their health on the line to meet the needs of our communities. And whereas an estimated 12% of workers in essential industries do not have public or private health insurance, and whereas promoting the ability of these workers to continue working and staying safe during periods of community restriction, physical distancing, or closure orders or directives is crucial to community resilience and continuity of essential functions. And whereas essential workers are a key piece of the continued functioning of our communities during this time of increased physical distancing and limited availability of services, risking their own safety and health in the execution of their duties to serve the public every day. And whereas current health orders requiring continued use of physical distancing and personal protective measures means these workers in Washington will need to continue performing their essential work under trying circumstances in response to the public health emergency caused by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Now, therefore, I, Lynn Robinson, Mayor of the City of Bellevue, Washington, and on behalf of its City Council, do hereby proclaim on June 1st, 2020, our continued support and recognition for the critical contributions of essential workers in Bellevue, and encourage all residents to recognize and express appreciation for essential workers as they continue to carry out their necessary professions in service to all of us during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you, Councilmember Barksdale. And we have one more proclamation for our 2020 graduating seniors, and I've asked Councilmember Robertson to read that, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I begin, I just wanted to thank the city for putting together the proclamation. I do have a high school senior living in my home, my daughter, and this has been a very difficult experience for a lot of the kids. Although I think they're making lemonade out of lemons because many seniors, including mine, were out cleaning up Bellevue today. So they're still doing wonderful things for our community, even as they have lost their all the pomp and circumstance of graduation. So now I'll read the proclamation. Whereas the 2019-2020 academic year has been interrupted by the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic, resulting in closures of Bellevue area schools and a dramatic interruption of the educational and social lives of all students, but in particular graduating seniors. And whereas these young people have had to give up many things that make high school memorable: sports, parties, field trips, theatrical performances, concerts, club activities, prom, and the typical graduation ceremonies and year-end activities that only happen once in life. And whereas Bellevue's 1,450 high school seniors have exhibited incredible strength, resiliency, and pride, working hard to graduate despite the challenges of completing the school year in virtual classrooms. And whereas educators have worked closely and passionately with our students and families to continue providing valuable and meaningful educational experiences through the challenges of the pandemic, including virtual graduation ceremonies for all of Bellevue's high schools. And whereas continued closures of many businesses and services in our area will likely impact the summer employment opportunities for many of these seniors during a critical time of transition to the next phase of their lives. And whereas families, friends, neighbors, and educators should recognize and encourage the abilities of all young people in our community by providing support as able, including further education, housing, employment, and recreational activities. And whereas the class of 2020 will be our future leaders, pioneers, creators, motivators, and role models who will continue to influence our community long after this crisis has ended.
Now, therefore, I, Lynn Robinson, Mayor of the City of Bellevue, Washington, and on behalf of its City Council, do hereby proclaim on June 1st, 2020, our appreciation and support of Bellevue's 2020 graduating seniors, and encourage all residents to recognize, encourage, and support the success of these young members of our community as they embark on their journey to adulthood during unprecedented times. Ooh, emotional. And continue to carry on and find ways to thrive during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. Congratulations to all our high school graduating seniors and our college seniors who reside in Bellevue and their families. Congratulations. Thank you, Councilmember Robertson. Congratulations to you as well.
Thank you.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
All those in favor say aye.
I'll second.
Oh, thank you. All those in favor say aye.
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 That passes. All right, we now come to written communications. City Clerk, are there any written communications to read or summarize into the record?
Yes, Mayor, sorry, technical difficulties there. There is one written communication to read into the record. The communication is from Michael Thorpe, and it reads as follows. This communication is with respect to the Council's upcoming meeting of June 1, 2020. In view of the protest activities and fairly widespread looting which occurred yesterday in Bellevue, I am requesting that the following be added to the meeting agenda. I believe that the citizens of Bellevue deserve to know exactly what happened yesterday. It appears from what was presented by the media that although the city was aware in advance of planned looting, that looting went virtually uncontrolled for hours. I am requesting that the City Council immediately authorize an independent investigation into exactly what occurred yesterday from beginning to end. It is essential that the investigation be independent, that it begin immediately so that valuable evidence is not lost, such as media film, local CCTV, eyewitness statements, and internal city communications. Please address this at tonight's meeting. Thank you.
Is that the end of the written communications?
That was the only communication the council received.
Okay, thank you. And I know Chief Milet was able to read that this morning, and we'll be covering these questions in his presentation later tonight. So now coming up, we are honored to have our King County Council Chair, former City Council member and Mayor of Bellevue, Claudia Balducci.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Very
Welcome.
Good. Thank you. It's very nice to be able to present to you tonight. I wish I could see you all. It's nice to see your pictures. I've brought just three things. Usually these presentations can go on a bit, and I know you've got a lot to do and it's a difficult time. So I've brought just three things to talk about. I want to preface before I start, though, that like so many residents of Bellevue, I was absolutely glued to the television set last night, watching what was going on in our city. And I had many emotions, but among them was a great deal of pride for how the leadership and staff of the city of Bellevue, Madam Mayor, our police chief, the officers on the street, the first responders, how they all responded to what is, I think, the most difficult situation I've seen on our streets in my life here. So congratulations to you on doing the right thing and managing a very, very difficult situation that was, as you pointed out at the beginning, and should be focused on a national need to address racial justice. The three things I have come to talk to you about today, the first two are COVID related. Wanted to share with you what we've been doing and will be doing at the County Council with regard to funding to respond to the crisis. I want to talk a little bit about the reopening of activities, which you may have followed with the governor's new order last Friday. And then I was asked specifically to bring one happy topic. So I will give a very brief update on what's going on with the East Trail corridor through Bellevue and the East Side. On the topic of our budgets, like everywhere, the COVID crisis has hit both sides of our spreadsheet in King County. On the expense side, we've taken on many tens of millions of dollars in additional expenses because we are the public health provider for the county and have had to pay for additional work on initially contact tracing and the actual health response. That will be a growing part of our work again as we start to come out of the stay home, stay healthy order. But we have also invested quite a bit of money into what we were calling the IQR sites, the isolation, quarantine, recovery sites that expanded to include de-intensification of shelter sites. I know you all are aware of the work that King County and the Red Lion and the Sophia Way have done in partnership to relocate their shelter, and also the Eastgate tent setup that is still not open and may not open, but is there in case of need for quarantine or a recovery center. In addition, we have put some funding into trying to support parts of our business community that are in areas that are really struggling. We put some money into culture, small business in unincorporated and incorporated King counties, tourism, and my favorite that I advocated for was we managed to find some funding through our lodging tax for homeless youth. That is one of the featured purposes that lodging tax can be used for. And so I was able to successfully advocate for $1 million to be set aside for supporting homeless youth providers, including Friends of Youth on the East Side. We are just about to take up our next budget supplemental. We've done 2 already this year. This will be our 3rd. And this supplemental will focus on the spending of CARES Act money that we received at King County from the federal government. We received $260 million, and we're being told by our budget office that about 50 to 60% of that will be needed to continue to support our ongoing public health response to COVID. But that means that 40 to 50% of it can be used to support community organizations and needs. And we started by adopting some principles. So we have decided that we want to, as a matter of public policy, prioritize first, obviously, we have to put money into our public health response. And then after that, focus on survival, meaning keeping a roof overhead and food on the table. And then beyond that, putting some support into economic recovery activities and mental and behavioral health and related safety programs like domestic violence and other types of programs that are especially needed in these times. And beyond that, we have also set up some principles for how we will approach the allocation of the funds. So in addition to the priorities, which is public health first, then survival, then other supports, we are going to be looking to ensure uninterrupted delivery of our own core services, which are, like the cities I imagine, threatened by revenue loss, which, as a significant aside, CARES Act funding cannot be used to help with. You can't use this money for revenue loss. We have committed to exercise responsible spending and accountability measures, especially in light of the fact that we're doing so much of this under emergency exemptions from regular procurement processes. We want to create immediate solutions that are sufficiently thoughtful to ensure lasting impacts and focus on equity and social justice to ensure that help is provided where it is needed most. We also committed to prioritize as narrow of a range of services as possible to make sure that federal relief dollars have the most deep and effective recovery impact. We committed to avoid duplication of services or having several agencies providing the same service, and where possible, utilizing existing programs that can quickly get relief funding out into the community. So we've transmitted this set of principles and priorities to the county executive. Next, they will put together a proposal, which will be transmitted back to the council, and then we will take it up for debate and vote. I'll keep you all in the loop as we do that, because one of the ways that we have been able to push funding out into the community quickly, effectively, and with good accountability is by using existing trusted organizations. So if there is a way that cities can play a role in providing some of these services or funding the services, you all know the local community and the local providers better than the county does. And so that's one thing we might be able to partner on with you. Also, as we did with some of the small business funding, pushing it out through chambers of commerce and other trusted partners, we'll be looking for ways to do that rather than creating procedural and programmatic wheels ourselves. So that's thing one. Thing two is, you probably know, on Friday, Governor Inslee announced that the Stay Home, Stay Healthy, I believe it was called, order that had been in place since March would expire on May 31st and be replaced with a new emergency order called Safe Start Washington, which sets out a phased reopening process so that county by county in the state of Washington, each county can progress at its own pace by meeting certain target milestones that relate to the risk of continued transmission or reemergence of COVID transmission. So King County, as you know, is in phase one, which is where we are today, and we do not meet the requirements yet for phase two. However, the new Safe Start Washington order contains a path for counties to go to a modified phase one by meeting lesser standards and having more safeguards. So we believe that King County does meet the requirements for the modified phase one, and we'll be putting together an application this week. We were hoping it would be today, but things being as they are, it will be sometime early this week. And we will apply to the state to be allowed to loosen up restrictions. And they are committed to responding quickly. So far in the counties that have moved from one phase to another, they've seen responses from the state in about 24 to no more than 72 hours. So we hope within just a few days to be able to have some good news to announce. And when we are able to proceed, you can see there's a document that I'd be happy to show you, but it's also online. The governor's announcement about this reopening will allow for phase two level manufacturing operations, some limited real estate operations, more in-store retail operations, personal services. I know we're all looking forward to getting haircuts, professional services, photography, in-home domestic services, pet grooming, and a limited amount of restaurant activity. If you may have been receiving, certainly we are receiving many very plaintive and understandable pleas to move safely but quickly so that people can start getting back to business and get the economy flowing again, and we can save some of our businesses. We are working very hard to progress into the next phase. Once a county does progress into another phase, then you stay there for at least 3 weeks to ensure that the virus is not making a comeback. And assuming that it's not, we can then continue to progress into phase 2, 3, and 4. So that is the path that we're on, and I look forward to it. Finally, because I was asked to bring something happy, I wanted to share with you all that we continue to progress on our East Trail project, the former Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway through Bellevue, actually from Renton all the way to the Snohomish County border. And that project will continue. The phases that we were planning to open are progressing. We're looking forward to having the expansion over 405, that connection reconnected as part of the state's project that they're proceeding with. The design phase for the Northeast 8th Street Bridge crossing is well underway, and that's projected to be in construction by next year. And you can see as you go further north that Sound Transit is already starting to provide the Interim trail that will loop around the north part of the operation and maintenance facility, which is almost completely constructed, to connect to 120th Avenue right there. So I thought that was good news. We were all very happy. And at the same time, we're conducting a study that would allow us to build fiber in the corridor when the final construction is happening. We could put fiber in at the same time, save some money, and potentially provide a great public amenity and possibly some revenue. So that's my report from King County. I'm happy to take any questions, Madam Mayor.
Oh, thank you very much. And thank you for including the upbeat ending there. So we'll be calling on council members in this order: Robertson, Barksdale, Lee, Zahn, Stokes, Deputy Mayor Newenhouse, and then me. So starting with Council Member Robertson.
Thank you, Councilmember Balducci. Really appreciate you coming down tonight to share what the county's doing. Very much eager to see the CARES money distributed in ways that will really help the community of Bellevue, and also to see us move into phase 2 as quickly as possible. But other than that, just thanks for coming and stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And congratulations on your graduate.
Thank you very much. As they grow, as you know, they grow up so fast.
I know. I remember when she was only up to my waist, so it's amazing. Yeah.
Councilmember Barksdale.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Chair Balducci. I don't have any questions, but it's really great to hear the updates, and thanks for all the work that you're doing in King County.
Thank you, Councilmember Barksdale. It's great to see you.
You too.
Councilmember Lee.
Hi, thanks, Councilmember Balducci. Claudia, welcome.
Thank you.
I really am glad to hear about this 5G consideration. It may sound like to be not a big deal, but I think it's very important for the future, especially what the future norm is going to be after Nova 619. And so this is a good way to keep things in mind when we have opportunity. Let's put it in. We may not realize what the value will be, but it will provide to prove to be very, very important. Thank you for that kind of consideration.
Thank you, Councilmember. Good to see you as well.
Thank you.
Councilmember Zahn.
Yes, I also thank you so much for, really thoughtfully considering the budget and the resource needs. We appreciate partnering with King County, and those areas that you mentioned are the same areas of focus that we've talked about in the city of Bellevue related to the needs and the gaps. The COVID has only put more pressure on systems that were already under resourced and struggling to make sure that the needs in our community were met. So I appreciate that. I know you didn't mention this, but I do want to say that I very much appreciate providing updates on the COVID response. The dashboard that King County created so that we can understand the data and what's going on is very much appreciated. And I know that takes time to build at a time when you're trying to address the immediate needs of COVID response and the public health. So I very much appreciate that. My only question is, when you talk about the CARES funding and looking at the $260 million, what's the timing for when you think that the budget discussion will be finished? And are you anticipating some of the funds actually going to cities, or is it more of the fact of actually more grants going to agencies that may be also supporting that Bellevue has already published or provided grants for?
Great. Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Zahn, and thank you for the kind words about the great work of public health. They process the data, they create the guidance, and they respond personally to do contact tracing and to fight the virus directly. So they're doing a really heavy lift for us, and your appreciation I will carry back. On the question about the CARES funding, so we expect it to be transmitted from the executive any day now, and then we are meeting every other week in council and in off weeks as a committee of the whole. So my hope is that we will be able to pass the budget within a few weeks. At our fastest, we've done it in less than 2 weeks with these other supplementals. This one is going to be big and possibly complicated, so it might take a little bit more than that. But it will be, it is targeted to be passed in June. and then we will have a sense of how the money flows at that point. But I will just, speaking for myself and my priorities, I think that we have an opportunity here to consider if we can meet our principles and our priorities, and also maybe direct money directly to cities for to support either direct service that you provide, or for you to then further grant to organizations in the community through existing programs, like you might increase your human services program, for example, or however the city does it. I just think that might be efficient, and it could potentially help cities with the revenue problem by enabling you to do things you would otherwise not be able to do, even though it can't directly, it's not by federal law. CARES money is not allowed to directly backfill for lost revenue due to COVID, but it is possible to use it to do things that you would ordinarily do that also affect, that also address COVID. So there's a possibility for a win-win there. It's definitely part of the discussion we need to have at council before we vote.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I look forward to when the King County Board of Health can meet again as one of the representatives. Thanks.
Thank you.
Councilmember Stokes. Councilmember Stokes, I cannot hear you. Councilmember Stokes.
I got it. I thought she did it automatically. Sorry. So what I was saying was, and I'll do it briefly, is that I appreciate Councilmember Zahn's raising the questions and having that little discussion about the COVID funding and how that all ties in, because that is very important. And we will work very closely with the county on that. I also appreciate the review of East Rail, and it's been a great journey from the very beginning on that. And I think the one thing that is very important for Bellevue is that it has we've been a great partner with the other cities, the ones who own property, and we're the stakeholders and with the group. And it's just amazing how it's come together, expanded the number of people involved. And I think really brought the East Side together in a very positive way. And it's just an exciting opportunity. And despite all the problems and concerns we're going to have to go through with this pandemic and whatever happens, in the long run, it's going to be a great asset for all of us. So I'm very excited about where it's progressing. And I did want to say on the piece on the getting into phase 2, and I appreciate the way you approach this, that we have to be very careful and also very aggressive at figuring out how to move forward and in a way that really addresses the issues, that gets the economy back in that way, but also making sure that we don't end up with a worse problem, which will really, really damage the economy. So I think what you indicated is the county is taking a very, very thoughtful, evidence-based, and also compassion-based approach to this. And we just all need to keep working together on this and move forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Stokes. We want it to be a one-way trip out of the stay home into more normal life again.
Right. Okay, Deputy Mayor Noonhouse.
Thank you, Mayor, and welcome, and thank you for the update, Councilmember Balducci. I like the one-way trip. I might have to adopt that one. Certainly.
I stole it too. You can steal it from me.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, we certainly don't want that to be a round trip, nor to come back during cold and flu season this winter, which I'm particularly concerned about. But thanks for the update on the COVID-19 on the East Rail. That's particular really great news. I just had one question regarding the CARES Act funding there, a little bit following up on council members on there. And you had mentioned that top priority being the public health and the survival focus there, and domestic violence, et cetera, which is spot on. But the economic development piece, how do you see that potentially coming about? Is that something the county might want to do directly itself? And if so, what might be some of the opportunities there to help businesses that are struggling right now and barely hanging on and can't wait to reopen, and if they don't reopen soon, they might not be able to reopen permanently. And if they are able to reopen, what might the county be able to do? Or do you see that maybe being the city's putting that in our court to help those businesses, even though, as you stated earlier, we can't do any direct funding or making up of lost revenue? But how do you see that coming about?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll say we dipped our toe into this area in our second supplemental budget, where we put, I want to say 3 million, 4 million into small business support within the incorporated areas, and another 3 or 4 million into the unincorporated areas. And so I am going to be looking to how that distribution worked. And if we find a path that works, we should keep using it. The example I'll give is not economic development, but it is, we know that there are organizations like the United Way that have done rental assistance. I don't want to see King County develop our own staffing and banking and, RFP process, all of that, in order to get rental assistance into people's hands, when I can just give it to United Way or somebody like that and have them do it. And it's faster, and it's less overhead, right? Mm-hmm. So I will be looking for those opportunities. On our list of priorities that we adopted into the motion that we voted on, we actually listed economic support to King County cities as part of our economic recovery strategy. So we will be looking to see if there is a way to do it with the cities, because you all do economic development. I know very well how Bellevue does economic development. And King County doesn't really have an economic development function outside of our local services department, which focuses on the unincorporated areas, because that's where we are the local government. So I think, although we haven't voted, and I can't really speak for the council until we do, I would say that my approach, and I think that this is widely agreed upon, would be to look for partnerships like the cities in this area, because you all have the infrastructure to do it. And we will probably also, again, look to the chambers to see if they can be helpful, because they have the infrastructure to do some of this. We also talked about specific programs like funding maybe provision of digital broadband or Wi-Fi access to communities or individuals where there's limited access. It's a little late for this school year, but we sure did learn how vital it was to have students all universally have access to the internet. I mean, they couldn't actually be in school this year if they weren't on the internet. We talked about job training programs. We do actually have some workforce economic development that we do at King County, but we don't fund the programs. We have partners to do that through. So primarily, in answer to your question, I think we're primarily going to be looking to partnerships and hopefully not to inventing the wheel, because to me that slows and limits the amount of money that we can push out. And I want to go as quickly as possible and get as much of it into the hands of folks in need as possible.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And Chair Balducci, just as somebody connected to the small business community, I would really hope that as these guidelines come down for stage 1.5 and onward, that it's really clear to small businesses how they can proceed, and that there's a direct line of communication between our chambers and the county in making sure that everybody does what they need to do to open as soon as they possibly can.
I will take that very much into consideration as I go back to the county, in virtually speaking, and because it's been a challenge all along. I just want to acknowledge that. At one point, I heard Dr. Duchin, who's our local health officer, say, and I think he was right, none of us have been through this before. I mean, none of us have. And no matter how much you may have trained or planned for it, the reality has been a series of adaptations, one after the other, that we've had to make together. And so at times we're going to call upon our business partners and others to do the best they can, to take the guidance and do the best they can with it. But we should provide the best guidance we can to help them do that. So I hear that request, I take it on board, and I will bring it back to the folks who are working on this at King County and at the state. That's the other thing. You've got state involvement and county involvement, and we need to make sure we're coordinating. So
well, and I'll just say that the threat of losing your license if you don't follow the guidelines appropriately is pretty tough for people to feel confident with their own interpretation. So maybe if there's some relaxing of that.
Well, so just to put it in plain terms, what I would hope is that the enforcement end of public health would be looking to educate first. So if we come across somebody who's using more than 25% of their square footage to do business, and they're supposed to be using only 25%, that before putting a stop, close the doors order or a citation of some kind, we would work with that business to say, here's what you should be doing, please do that. And then, give them a warning first. It's all very valid. Thank you for that. And as I said, I'll take that on board and take it back.
I appreciate so much. And thank you for joining us tonight. Very nice to have you back in our virtual chamber.
All right. Thanks so much. Have a good rest of your meeting.
Thank you. Okay. Next we have the report of the city manager, Mr. Miyake.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. I have two items under the manager's report tonight. The first one is with respect to the Resetting the Neighborhood Area program. Included in your council packets was a management brief on this particular item. And tonight, staff will provide the council with a status update of our great neighborhood planning effort. Joining us this evening is Emil King, our Assistant Director of Community Development, as well as a number of other staff members that I will allow him to introduce. With that, I'll turn it over to Emil. Emil?
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Robinson, Deputy Mayor Neuenhaus, members of council, and City Manager Miyake. Tonight we have assembled core staff who will highlight the process and creative and inclusive outreach and engagement techniques we'll be using for the Great Neighborhoods relaunch. The Great Neighborhoods program is how we've branded the city's efforts to carry out the council priority for neighborhood area planning to occur throughout Bellevue. The planning division in the city's community development department is now fully staffed, and we're able to resume this program that was put on temporary hold in March of 2019. During this pause, we've retooled the program through a continuous improvement lens. Number one, by learning from the initial rollout and making smart adjustments. And number two, implementing measures to adapt to COVID-19 realities. I and others in the department are very excited about re-engaging with the Northwest Bellevue and Northeast Bellevue neighborhoods later this month with our soft launch. They will ultimately be the first two neighborhoods to have their plans completed. Tonight, you're going to hear from two key members of the project team, Nicholas Matz, the project manager, and Brooke Broad, the community engagement lead. Next slide, please. No direction is needed tonight from council. We're using this opportunity to provide information to council and members of the community at this key milestone. Next slide, please. Tonight's short presentation is focused on how we're adapting our work to COVID-19 realities. Staff will explain how we're adapting our work based on, number one, the broader context and importance of neighborhood area planning. Number two, the content that we're going to be focusing on. And number three, the process adjustments that we're going to be using. So at this point, I want to transition to Nicholas to go into a bit more detail on the next slide.
Thank you, Emil. Mayor Robinson, council members, thanks for hosting us in the virtual meeting tonight. We are acutely aware of COVID-19 and its impacts on our communities. And as Emil pointed out, one of our primary concerns was making sure that we were doing something so community-based with deference to the impacts that COVID-19 has had on our communities. Jane Jacobs said, cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by everybody. And I just thought, given the events of this past weekend and the somber approach and reflection that we need to take from when we developed our presentation to you last Friday, everybody is part of this community, and the things that we're all doing as one city and our communities is making us confident and responsible that we'll be able to deliver great neighborhoods to the communities that we think are ready to hear it. So if we could go on to the next, that slide. Thank you, Charmaine. I'm sorry, the back, there we go. And that starts with the context. We were rightly concerned that when we went out with a neighborhood planning effort that people would say, really, now? But what we heard and what people told us, knowing that it's both a challenge and opportunity to relaunch great neighborhoods, and knowing that we require innovation and creativity, what we heard is people have been feeling isolated and powerless about their futures. And thinking about where they can live can offer deliberate opportunities to rebuild a community. So we're actually hearing from the people that live in these neighborhoods about this is a good time to do this. Folks have, for better or worse, rediscovering their neighborhoods, and they're ready to talk about them in a more coherent and guided fashion. And the way we're going to do that is with our content. We have created a template, and it's a roadmap. So think of a roadmap that can take you places and can do things for you that you would otherwise not know how to do. Our template is a roadmap that is framed by a 7-part guidance that essentially each member of these communities we're inviting to help build with us. And this guidance is framed that's already built into the neighborhoods element of the comprehensive plan, which you all adopted in the major plan update in 2015. So we had this blueprint ready, and now we have a roadmap that is going to be something that is a shared opportunity to go forward into neighborhoods that stand up as part of our communities. We will be addressing a host of other issues, including resilience, safety, walking, biking, and other emerging issues. But the template in its 7 parts requires us to do some pretty innovative process. And in regards to that, I'm going to hand it over to Brooke Broad, who is our community engagement lead, and she's going to walk you through a high-level overview of how we're actually going to do this.
Hey, thank you, Nicholas, and thank you, Mayor Robinson and the rest of the council for this opportunity to give you this update. As Nicholas said, we are seeking to engage in a collaborative process with the community to build out this template. And all engagement activities will tie directly to a specific section of the template, which we believe will provide really important clarity to residents about what they are participating in. COVID-19 has definitely required us to be flexible, and so we are moving all of our community engagement events online. There will also be multiple opportunities for residents to participate via our online engaging platform, which you saw a little screenshot of earlier in this presentation at engagingbellevue.com. We are also going to rely on some of our more analog tools like the phone and actual mail to reach people and let them know about opportunities to participate. We have already begun to have virtual conversations with residents to start to build relationships and better understand how they want to participate. These conversations have been really fruitful, and they are really reinforcing the idea that people want to be talking about their neighborhoods and how to ensure that they are strong moving forward. We do hope to eventually be able to meet in person later this year, but of course we're going to be following the public health directives and also be really sensitive to community preferences in determining when exactly that is appropriate. In the meantime, we're going to continue to have online events, opportunities to participate again online, and have one-on-one chats with residents throughout the summer. And we certainly invite residents to reach out to us via engagingbellevue.com if they have a question they want to ask or if they want to connect with anybody on the team. And then finally, I think one of the things we're very excited about is to ensure broad and representative participation that recognizes how diverse our neighborhoods are. We are planning on bringing aboard temporary help who will be there to support culturally competent outreach. And Charmaine, if we can move to the next slide, we'll just kind of give you a high level overview of our timeline. So as you see, we're getting ready to do a soft launch. These will be virtual informational events on June 16th and 17th. And that really kicks off our first phase, which is capacity building. During this time, we will be engaging with residents, informing them about the opportunity to participate, starting to understand what they care about. And that will take us through the summer. We will really engage in the plan development from September of this year through April of next year, 2021. And then our final phase is plan adoption, when a draft plan will go to the Planning Commission and then eventually to Council through adoption. We are planning on providing informational updates to Council at the start of each phase, so you'll be informed as we move through this process about how we're doing. We've really been thoughtful in the structuring of this timeline to give us enough time to build relationships and capacity within the neighborhoods to participate. We wanted to make sure there was enough time to engage in really authentic and collaborative engagement with the community. And also importantly, this is really structured to follow the comprehensive planning amendment process and allow us to have something approved by the end of next year. And that brings us to the close of our presentation.
Thank you, Brooke. I just wanted to point out, to the benefit of Mayor Robinson and the council members, the third member of our team is Elizabeth Direct, who has just joined the city. She'll be the project manager for the Northwest Bellevue neighborhood, and I will be doing the project management for the Northeast Bellevue neighborhood, while Brooke keeps us both in line. So thank you for that. And that does conclude our presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. It's just amazing to have a little business as usual in the midst all that we're dealing with in Bellevue. It's very reassuring. So I welcome this presentation tonight. And we're going to have an opportunity for each council member to ask questions or comment. I'll be calling in this order: Councilmember Barksdale, Councilmember Stokes, Zahn, Lee, Robertson, Deputy Mayor Newenhouse, and me. Go ahead, Councilmember Barksdale. Councilmember Barksdale, you're still muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. There we go.
There you go.
I had the hardware on mute. Thank you. And just was saying thank you to staff, email Nicholas, for all your work in putting this plan together. I'm really excited about this and love the Jane Jacobs quote. And also,
all right.
Yeah. And also the focus on neighborhood, helping neighborhoods identify their collective identity. Really love that. So question for you in terms of how this could feed into sort of the annual survey as well. So as you're engaging, you're going to identify priorities and attributes that are very important to the neighborhoods. And just curious about ways that we could feed those into the annual survey to continue to follow up on those, knowing that those are important to the neighborhoods and throughout the community. So that's one. Should I ask just only like two or three?
Go ahead with all your questions.
Okay, perfect.
They can answer.
Okay, and then to what extent, so we have neighborhood associations and we have neighborhood areas. Can you talk a little bit about how the work that's happening through the neighborhood area planning process is going to work with that? I don't know I'm not trying to lead it anywhere, but just trying to figure out how we reconcile those two. Thank you.
I'm not hearing anything. Is there an answer to those?
Nope. I'm sorry. We were just virtually deciding who's going to take the response, Mayor Robinson. So, thank you, Councilmember Barksdale. I'll give it a shot and ask Emil and Brooke to add anything else in. In terms of the information and the material that we're going to get from folks through this process and into the annual survey process, one of the pieces of the template does include both a demographic profile and a list of actions that communities are hoping to see help realize their plan thing. So because we're regularizing this process not only through NAP but through the amendment process itself, I can see that makes a whole lot of sense to take that data and transform it into something that can help us feed into the annual survey process. We know that our department, for example, has a metric regarding that, and I see that as something that we can be anticipatory about, so that we can feed it into the annual survey process. On your second question, Councilmember Barksdale, in regards to using the neighborhood associations and homeowner associations, we are actively engaged with a number of different community folks, and as far as both bringing them into the capacity building and the engagement part, but also aligning our work with our fellow department and neighborhood services, where, for example, neighborhood leadership work is being done, and where the work to identify future leaders and those sorts of things is going on. So we are seeing them as active participants in the process, as well as making sure that we align with other staff, not only in neighborhood services, but across the city, in other places where staff has programs and services that deliver on the neighborhood model. We want to make sure that is an active and intentional part of the work.
Great. Thank you. I'll only make one last comment and then I'm good. One thing I think that would be interesting, you mentioned profiles. I think it'd be interesting to figure out a way to segment the people in our community throughout the neighborhood, so that we can then look and see which segments of our community are we maybe not addressing to the extent that we'd like to on an ongoing basis. Thank you.
We'll do that. Thank you.
Councilmember Stokes, you are up next.
Okay, hit the right buttons. Yeah, I think this is a great presentation, and appreciate Councilmember Barksdale's questions on this too. The only thing I'm really excited about it, and the two things I want to address. One is I would be so
Jackson.
Pleased, Jackson, get out of here. So pleased to get something done in a year and a half, and I like that schedule. So let's try to keep on that, because things do get bogged down. And the other thing is, what are we going to do with the learned experiences through this? Is there going to be a review of how this went before we go into the next phase, to the next group? Get out of here, Jackson.
Yeah, I can go ahead and address the second comment from Councilmember Stokes. We'll again apply a continuous improvement lens onto this rollout for Northeast and Northwest Bellevue. So we'll definitely be documenting lessons learned, and the next two neighborhoods per previous council direction were the Crossroads and Newport neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, great. And this will be great. This is the first time we've done it this way, so it's a great learning experience as well. And I think we've become much more nimble in doing these things. So I'm looking forward to this as it goes through. And I'm sure everybody's glad we finally launched it. So thank you very much. Great presentation, and I really like the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Zahn.
Yeah, I'm also so excited. I love the tagline, "Build with us," because I think about how do we co-create a shared roadmap. So that really resonates with me about the heart of the community. A couple of comments, and then I do have a couple of questions. So I'm just going to ask them all, and then whichever fits here versus just getting back to me. When I think about then the building relationships, I'm wondering how we're going to go about doing that. Is it through some trusted messengers or BDAN, so that we're making sure that those that may be hard to reach, especially during this time of COVID, that we find a way for them to have a voice? I'm curious to understand, since we already started in Northeast and Northwest Bellevue, are we going to be using that information as the springboard to the continual information, or since enough time has passed, are we starting fresh? And then as we think about COVID and what may be some new normals or things that we leave behind and things that we lean into, I'm curious about how COVID might play a part in this. And then lastly, I had an opportunity to listen into a National League of Cities resilience for cities. And I'm just wondering how we make sure that we are building for the future that is resilience and built into by design.
Thank you, council members. I'll take the resilience question very quickly, then ask Brooke to respond to your other questions around our relationship building and how we're looking at our communities, especially the underserved communities. We did actually have a person out in Northeast Bellevue who talks about resilience and is actually actively working in his community to develop a resilience framework. Of course, before COVID, it was related to natural disasters and other such things. But now we're bringing that COVID lens to bear on that. And so we will be very direct about a resilience component as part of the community template in the plan. But I'll ask Brooke to address the rest of your questions.
Yes, thank you, council members, for really good questions. So, you know, as part of our relaunch efforts, we really took a look at our existing budget to repurpose things. And we are going to be hiring temporary folks who will be assisting us with culturally competent outreach. So we would seek to hire folks from the community who have that connection and ties and who are trusted messengers within the community to ensure that we are really running a process that is welcoming and inclusive and can ensure that we are reaching people who might not normally be reached or who traditionally do not participate in this. Also, as part of that work, we have really increased the amount of our existing budget that we are devoting to translation and interpretation to ensure that, again, our multilingual residents are able to participate.
And then, so data from the beginning?
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me of this. Yes. So we have all of the previous comments and we will be factoring those in. I think some of the most useful stuff that we are carrying over into this relaunch are a number of community values that were identified through previous outreach. So that will help ground us in our initial outreach. And yes, all of the comments we still have, the ideas and the solutions, and that will be reference material for existing outreach efforts.
Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Lee.
Okay, you can hear me now, right?
I can hear you.
Thank you. Oh, great presentation. I'm really impressed with what you have been doing. You know, I mean, during this COVID-19, lots of folks are finding difficult to do their work. But obviously, you know, you are making a good use of your time and you're already adjusting to the new norm, I guess, the future. You know, all these things you're talking about, you know, it makes a lot of sense. And you're actually, you know, getting going. And I like your word, the word you say, many voices. It's easy to say we have one vision, one future. But, you know, it's more complicated when you can do that with many voices. But I appreciate you recognizing it. The key is how do you make that happen? You know, have all many voices and to still come up with one vision and one future. So I compliment you for having that focus. And I liked what you're saying, that box they mentioned. You know, data is important. Get graphic profile, getting information. And that's what you said you could be doing. That's great. With the community and the word they use, the capacity building. I think that's really represents what we're talking about. They are underrepresented, underdeserved communities that have not been out there and being, you know, represented because they do not have the capacity, the people that can make the connections to build the relationship, you know, with what the city wants to do, what the mainstream, what everybody else wants to do. They all have to be connected. I think that's the key. So I think the effort you are making, I hope it's going to really work out. But I really compliment you identifying those, identifying future leaders, and using the people you're talking about competent, but not just culturally competent, but community connected individuals, and who share the values with the community that we're talking about and the community at large, so that there's that connection, and so there's that communication, and so that we can build relationships. So I think that's really the of how to build many voices. So I like the things you were laying out to us. And another thing you mentioned is innovative outreach, capacity building. I think, and through virtual engagement, these are great things that we are preparing for the future through this 19. So I'm really happy. Again, good job. You have not been sitting still waiting for the future to figure out what happens, but you're actually, working toward building those blocks that's necessary to meet the challenges we're going to face when we are facing the new norm after COVID-19 and during COVID-19 and in the future. So I really doing, and I'd like to emphasize one more thing. Capacity building means we identify the data, demographic profile, and then determining what are the gaps there that people who are the people underserved, who are underrepresented. What's the gap that we need to recognize and we need to build? We need to build up, and we need to narrow and maybe eliminate, ideally, so that we have the connection. We can make them play on the equal footing, equal grounds. So I appreciate that, and I think I'm looking forward to what you're going to be doing, and help if we can, because we are part of the community, council members. So just let us know. We'll be there. We'll be part of your team. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Councilmember Robertson.
Hi, Nicholas, and welcome
Hi,
aboard to Brooke. I have some questions. I'm a little bit confused about exactly what the goal is of the neighborhood area plans. Number one, I'm super happy to see this relaunched. It's been a while since we revisited it, and I don't know if I ever had clarity of what was in and what was out. So right now, these are going to be replacing sub-area plans, which do provide guidance on how an area develops. They have some pretty meaty policies in them. I remember, for example, the Crossroads sub-area plan has a policy of no more multifamily until something else happened. I don't remember exactly what was in there, but there were some pretty meaty policies that led to land use code changes. So, and I'm looking at the template, and this includes a vision and a profile, key opportunities, policies to guide future development, and then the goals and actions. So I'm wondering if this is more of a guiding document or if it's really going to be a plan. Question number one.
Thank you, Councilmember Robertson. I'll start and I'll ask Emil to join in. It is the blueprint for this process. We are clearly retaining what we used to call sub-area plans. The blueprint for this process is in the neighborhoods element of the comprehensive plan itself. It actually specifies how we're going to accomplish this adaptive process. But the elements in the relaunch, the elements that we're keeping, we're going to keep a policy section. There is a clear policy section. It's linked, though, to a new actions section that allows people to read not only what a community intends, but what it wants to have. This creates another form of a blueprint for the city and others to understand how services and programs can be delivered to neighborhoods. But we are not stepping away from the traditional model that has us essentially laying out these first components that Brooke and that you talked about, Councilmember Robertson. But we're still coming back to the meat of the plan, as it were, as a policy document, so that it can literally provide that guidance. Thinking of it as a roadmap, you're still going to be able to see this guidance across each of the neighborhoods in the city, whether it's the Crossroads issue that you identified or in another one. But it's also going to be able to have other neighborhoods share this common understanding of how we're addressing what we still would be calling sub-area planning. We will not be opening up the annual amendment process to land use changes and land use designations with NAP, with the Great Neighborhoods Work. That continues to remain the council's prerogative and authority through the annual plan amendment process, as well as the major update. We're moving these back to both more traditional focus and an innovative focus on being able to go forward, because now we're actually going to have all of our communities writing these plans and engaging them. But the meat of the plan still remains that policy section, and you'll be able to see that guided by the neighborhoods element, which I believe was Council Manic intent back in 2015 when we set this whole process up to get going.
Great. Okay. And Mayor, if you want to cut me off now and come back around, otherwise I have a couple more questions. Because I know that I'm over 3 minutes if you count Nicholas's speaking. Which is fine. I asked a question.
Why don't you plow through?
Okay, thank you. So secondly, I'd like to see more information about the scope, because I know that when we first started talking about this, we talked about that there would be certain things that all neighborhoods would be asked about. For example, tree policies, if they want to adopt tree policies. And I'm just going to, I guess I'll just say, I'd like to have a follow-up on exactly the issues that are going to be raised, I guess, and we'll start with these first two neighborhoods that we anticipate asking all neighborhoods. But I'd also like to see, for example, if they have specific requests for capital projects, connecting trails, mini pocket parks, things like that, because I'd like to see these plans feed into, the way I see these is they would feed into multiple additional work items. One would be, we would consider the neighborhood plans when we look at our budget, if there's requests for trails, etc. We would look at these plans as we look at comp plan amendments or our next great major comp plan update. We might look at these plans for adopting new land use code, for example, tree retention policies, if the neighborhood wants that. So it's just like the council vision, where we have a vision of how we want to see things. We also have a list of priorities. So I'd love to have these be the sub-area plan, but also have the components like we've done for the city on the council behalf, so that we can get that information from the neighborhoods. I think it would be a lot more informative. Now, we're not going to necessarily promise we're going to do all that work, but I think that should be part of the discussion. And then finally, I know that there's been concern by people that these neighborhood plannings process be done by the people who live in the neighborhood, who own property in the neighborhood, who have businesses in the neighborhood. So we want to make sure that we do the outreach there so that it's not too much influenced by people who are outside those boundaries. And anything you want to say about my comments would be welcome.
Thank you, Councilmember Robertson. In fact, we intend exactly what you see these plans doing. The policies and action sections are that specific blueprint, cookbook list, whatever you want to call it, that informs others about what's needed and desired and wanted in the neighborhood. We will be able to, the reason for this systemic council briefings to you over the course of Great Neighborhoods is to tell you what we're finding, not only the issues that have been raised, but how they start to translate from what communities see as important into these policies and actions that we're going to use. So I would assure you that we are doing exactly what your concern is about the scope and how that translates into action and a blueprint and action. We also look very closely at the demographics, because it's my continuing intent that these plans are for the people who live there now, however they chose to live there, whether they own or whether they rent, the people who have businesses there, whether those businesses are in commercial places or elsewhere, and the people that are going to live in those communities. For example, we know that a significant component of the demographic profile in Northeast and Northwest Bellevue is home ownership, and we are clearly distinguishing these different elements of our demographic profiles to make sure that we are reaching out to everybody, and that's certainly a significant component of that.
Great.
Emil,
sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just going to ask Emil if he wanted to add anything to your comments, Council Member.
No, we can provide council the scope of work just so you have kind of written documentation of what's included in the effort.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Robertson.
Thank you. I'd
Absolutely.
like to see that. And are you going to come back to council anytime between now and this draft scheduled time of November for a check-in, or are we just going to you're just going to come back in November?
We're checking back with you in September at the beginning of phase 2, council member.
Oh, I didn't see that on the schedule. So,
Yeah.
all righty. That sounds great. Thank you guys very much. I'm excited to see this happen. I know the neighborhoods have been wanting this for a long time.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Noonhouse.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, Emil, Nicholas, Brooke, thank you so much for the great presentation and great questions and comments by my colleagues. Yeah, just thrilled to get this going. And as Councilmember Robertson just said, yeah, neighborhoods are ecstatic that we're going to get this going again and want to be a part of this process and want to build with us. So this is just great to get this going. And I'm so glad to hear as well that we're looking at the old school techniques here during COVID-19 of mail and phone calls, et cetera, as well as the innovative ways of doing the virtual and the Zoom, et cetera. And I'm hearing a lot of the things I think that are all important to us as a council in terms of the outreach and the culturally competent outreach is so important for us. So this is really all great stuff. So can't wait to get started and looking for the appropriate updates when you come back to council. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
The only thing I have to add is that you talk about being flexible in this. And I think the word needs to be resilient, because you don't want to just return to where you were. You want to actually adapt to a new normal. And so I know that's what you're thinking. And I think the language needs to reflect that. And I just really appreciate you diving into this right now. It's a great opportunity to look to the future and see how we can continue to improve and be the best we can be with a lot of input. So thank you for that.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
the
ma'am.
great comments.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, next we started this with Chief Milet. This kind of morphed from being a crime trend update due to COVID-19 to then some statements and reactions regarding the death of Mr. Floyd, and now is an overview of last night's protest. So we're probably going to get a little bit of all of that, but Mr. Miyake, did you want to introduce Chief Milet?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and council members. And as you mentioned, in light of last night's protest event in our city, we have decided to pivot away from talking in detail about some of our crime trend data. And instead, Chief Milet is going to provide an overview of the event itself, as well as address some of the number of questions that have been raised by both the public and the council, as well as some concerns. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve. Again, we're not asking for any direction, and given Steve's limited time, given the event is still here in our city, we're going to forego asking any questions this evening. So Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Miyake. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Yesterday was a very dark day in the city of Bellevue, as well as in many communities across this nation. Since the tragic death of George Floyd at the hands of one of my brethren, we have seen protests, riots, looting, violence, attacks on police, attacks on innocent bystanders from coast to coast, north to south. We began monitoring this immediately after we saw the violence in Minneapolis. Let me also say just real quick, almost every officer I know condemns what happened to Mr. Floyd. No one has even attempted to try and justify the actions of Officer Chauvin. We reject it, we condemn it, and that is not us. And so unfortunately we get tagged by it, and people start looking at us with deeper suspicion because of incidents like that. And we lose all of the ground that we make when we are building bridges into communities to establish trust and legitimacy. So in the aftermath of Memorial Day, we started seeing all the violence in Minneapolis, and it started spreading to the larger cities. We anticipated that it could arrive in Seattle, but we were not sure if it would have arrived in Bellevue or not, but we were on guard. We started talking about it and making some preparations. When Seattle said that they had a scheduled protest, they asked for mutual aid from us. We always send it, and we sent our bike unit, our crowd control element, and then eventually it was our SWAT team over there when the crowds became too much for the resources on the ground to handle. And when they started going after one of the precinct houses to burn it down like what we saw in Minneapolis, we sent our SWAT team over there to support their efforts. We watched in great horror as we saw the city of Seattle being just ravished. And when Mayor Durkin issued the curfew ordinance or the curfew proclamation, we started looking at the chatter that was going on. I had officers, some of the best in our profession, monitoring social media and elsewhere. And I won't get into the specific tactics that we use. And we started seeing comments that, well, Seattle has a curfew, but Bellevue doesn't. Let's go to Bellevue. That single comment started a conversation that started to spread over the next several hours. As soon as that happened, I immediately recalled all of my officers. We went into 12-hour shifts and started preparing for the worst. Hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. When we started getting further intelligence, more reliable intelligence, that they were naming Bell Square and the Bravern and specific stores, we recalled our assets from Seattle because we knew that a Category 4, Category 5 hurricane was about to land in the city of Bellevue. The day before this happened, with the assistance of our city manager, I began having conversations with business leaders in the city, sharing with them the intelligence that we had and making some recommendations to prepare. We strategically placed officers in areas that we thought that these criminals would try to infiltrate law-abiding citizens whose intent was to lawfully gather, assemble, and protest. As we all know, and it is our motto here, and who we are, diversity is our strength, and Bellevue welcomes the world, to include those that want to lift their voices in response to injustice. And this city has a long history of providing a safe space for people to do that very thing. We very rarely have violent incidents in this city. But this is a different group. This isn't a group that's coming over to protest. This was not a group that had any concern about civil rights or the death of Mr. Floyd or anything else. This was an organized criminal element that was coming over here for one reason and one reason only, and that was to steal and to cause damage. And we recognized that, but we also had a balance. If we had lawful protesters exercising their constitutional rights and these individuals embedding themselves with these law-abiding citizens and members of the public. And that is always a challenge for us. So as I said, we began our preparation work. We started having conversations with Seattle Police Department. We let them know what was going on. As things started winding down in Seattle, we told them that if we had a need and they had availability, would they be able to respond for mutual aid? And they said, of course. So the following day, yesterday, things were pretty quiet in Seattle. We started the conversation with them about if we did have this arrive in Bellevue, what can they send us? And we were expecting up to over 100 officers to include their bike squad, that bike squad in Seattle is one of the best in the country. And we work very, very closely with them. We've been trained by them. And, you know, we work shoulder to shoulder often. And so right before our criminal element here started to arrive at about 3 o'clock, things started to heat up in Seattle. And mayor and council, I don't think that was by accident. I think it was by design. These are highly trained, capable individuals who know what they're doing. So they tied up the Seattle resources, which prevented us from getting mutual aid. As soon as things started heating up over there, we started to see the arrival of these different cells. They committed a couple traffic violations, and my motor officers were right on top of them. We were identifying, we had a show of force, and my hope was that they were going to recognize, okay, they were prepared and move on, but that didn't happen. So I was out there in the field and watching as things were going on. I saw about 20 people start congregating at Bellevue and Northeast 8th, and they looked like they were legitimate protesters. They had signs up. Then another 20 arrived. So there was about 40. Then I started seeing them look like what appeared to be communicating through some sort of radio system. And then I saw phone calls being made. Mayor, within moments, it was like a tsunami that came at us. 100, 200, 300 people. They took over the intersection. We started to deploy our resources because we can't come out right out of the gate with all of our bikes and crowd control and everything, because it chills the very thing that legitimate protesters have a right to do. We make our presence known to provide them a safe space to lift their voices up. But quickly, I'm telling you, within minutes, it swelled. They took over the intersection in like a wave. They pivoted and then started heading over to the Hyatt. We started sending our resources over there. We were able to prevent significant damage that I have no doubt that they were intent on committing. When we started to disperse them, they went into multiple cells and they just ran and spread out through the city of Bellevue. Some went towards the Bravern, and we knew that was going to be a target. Some went towards Bell Square. We knew that was going to be a target. But then some went all throughout the downtown area. And so we were trying to contain, but containing was just impossible. Maintaining sight of them was becoming a major challenge because it went beyond the resources that we had. We sounded the alarm with all of our other partner agencies, and they were en route. They were coming to our aid, but it was taking some time. Again, I'm convinced had Seattle not had to keep their resources in the city, and they would have been able to respond within minutes, I think that things would have been a little different, but it was what it was. And so we were containing and dealing with this and waiting for our mutual aid to arrive. Now, again, I don't want to overemphasize this, but I do want to emphasize it. They use tactics to defeat and overwhelm our resources. Tactics that we've seen in the largest of cities, New York. The NYPD was unable to manage it. These are 40,000 cops and some of the best in the world. Los Angeles Police Department, Minneapolis, Austin Police Department, all over the map. They used the same tactics, the same strategies, and they were successful in every opportunity they had to overwhelm the police resources. And we were no different. No doubt that these people have training, they're communicating, they're organizing, they're strategizing, and they executed their system. And Unfortunately for us, they were successful in many ways. Now, I regret, truly regret, that any of our businesses suffered the loss that they did. I walked away from last night, and again, I'm sitting there and I'm questioning, could we have done anything different? I don't like to lose. None of our officers like to lose, especially to individuals like this. And so I started thinking that, you know what, we failed. We failed. We failed the businesses in Bellevue. But then someone said, you know what, you need to redefine what victory is and what failure is. We didn't have any loss of life. We didn't have any serious injuries to our officers. We didn't have any buildings burnt down to the ground. And that kind of reframed it for me. And so while I still regret that any of our businesses lost property, some will not recover. They were already suffering because of COVID-19, and this was just another, it wasn't even a punch in the gut. It was a shot in the head. But we got overwhelmed, as did many agencies across the nation. So questions came up, and I asked the same questions about looting. I've been a policeman for 31 years, 35 years if you include my military police experience. Nobody that I've talked to, the most experienced in issues like this, those that were in LA during the riots, those that were in Seattle during WTO, some of the most highly trained individuals on crowd control that have seen it all, not only here in the United States, but across the world. They all said they had never seen anything like this. And I don't mean this to give these criminals credit, but it's something that was new to us and we're going to adapt and overcome. So the question was, why didn't we arrest looters? We work with the resources that we had. We have to prioritize in a continuum what our most highly valued priorities are. And the very first thing is the preservation of life. Life of our citizens, our members of our community, members of the public, the individuals that are committing these crimes, and our officers. That is the most important thing. The training and best practices in situations like this, where we have riots, we have widespread looting and damage and all the things that we witnessed yesterday. Best practices, if we want to take one person into custody, you need a minimum of 3 officers to take this individual into custody. Why? The reason why is these individuals also have training on how to get people out from the clutches of our law enforcement professionals, basically to de-arrest the individual trying to arrest. And what do? They surround the officers, they get on top of the officers, they assault the officers. We've seen this in Chicago, we've witnessed this in Seattle. When my officers were over in Seattle during the first event, they told me that at one point they were surrounded by thousands of people. And at any given time, had they decided to take my officers out, my officers, they couldn't defend themselves. They were taking bottles, they were taking bricks to the head, they had fireworks being fired at them. And so that's one of the reasons why you need a minimum of 3, because they will turn and attack and harm. So we got to balance it. I have a minimum number of officers. Even when our mutual aid arrived, we were still outnumbered. And so we step back, and again, we go back to our priority and our continuum in our priority, and life was number 1. Over the course of this event, we arrested 14 different people. The youngest person we arrested was 13 years of age. The oldest was 61. None of them were Bellevue residents. Most came from south of Bellevue, some in Seattle. The 13-year-old was arrested for burglary. He was in a company of 2 or 3 other adults. And the 61-year-old, this raises another issue. I got questions, Chief. You know, you had this contact with the group there at Bellevue Way and Northeast 4th, while people are looting behind you. And I can address that later. Why did you not turn around and arrest these individuals? The reason that my officers stayed stationary, at one point, this very large group of legitimate protesters, people that were there to lift their voices up to be heard, they were sitting on the ground, they were peaceful, and they had a right to be there. Later on in the evening, a vehicle came into the crowd, and we are very, very fortunate that that person that ran into the crowd didn't injure anybody or kill anybody. We needed to provide the presence there so they could do what they were doing safely. That is our priority, is to provide a safe environment for them to be able to protest. The very people that we needed to provide that space for is the reason why those officers remained where they were as people were coming out of Bell Square with loads of clothes and other merchandise. Had the officers not been there, we probably would have witnessed a homicide because of the vehicle. The individual was arrested that was operating the vehicle, and that was our 61-year-old individual. Throughout the night, when we did make arrests and make contact with people, we found several people were armed with firearms, bats, bottles, rocks, and pry bars. They did throw rocks at us, and we responded as best we could. The mayor issued a curfew and weapons ban order, which continues today. There is no doubt that the lessons that we learned, and will probably continue to learn because I don't think this is over, there is the potential that they're going to come back. My profession, chiefs across the country, we're going to dissect all of this because we dealt with the same thing. And we're going to overcome our deficiencies. We're going to overcome the tactics they used, and we're going to be better. And we will always adapt to whatever new thing is thrown at us. So where are we at today? Right now, we had some protests in Bellevue today. They were very peaceful. People came into Bellevue to do exactly what they have the constitutional right to do, which we will provide that safe space. They were loud, they were passionate, they were angry, they were emotional, and they had every right to be. We're united with them in that. Right now in Bellevue, there are no active protests that I'm aware of. We have resources in the field to deal with the things that we've been faced with. Yesterday, we requested National Guard as part of mutual aid. With the assistance of other city team members, we were able to secure 100 National Guardsmen and women, and they remain here now. I think a part of them had to go to Kirkland because they were experiencing protests, and I would imagine they may be up in Linwood right now because my understanding they have a very, very large situation up there, and I think the same elements and cells that were here are trying to get into the Alderwood Mall. We have tactical units, bikes, crowd control, traffic motor units, and booking teams. In on the streets right now. We're working with the county and the state, our regional partners, to resupply our munitions. If something happens right now, we have enough, but we want to make sure that we have ample supply. And there's other things that I don't want to discuss right now because this is a public forum and I do not want to talk about tactics and strength of our numbers and everything else. The weapons and curfew, weapons ban and curfew has been extended by the mayor, working with the city attorney and the mayor. The curfew order has been extended, and additionally, the order prohibits anyone in certain areas from possessing weapons such as bats, rocks, and bottles. All items these criminals use as weapons. There was a question about how the National Guard is requested. So, I'm at least in my experience, and I oftentimes revert back to my Texas experience. First, an emergency needs to exist where the situation has grown beyond the ability for the local government to manage the situation. And then there's formal requests that are made up through the governor's office. The governor's office has to approve it. And then it takes time for them to mobilize. Fortunately for us, they didn't get here as quickly as I wanted to, but they got here as quickly as they could. They were detailed in Seattle, and then they were diverted. Even when there was still activity in Seattle, they were diverted here, and they arrived in Bellevue sometime last evening. And we had about 100, a little bit more than 100 National Guard members arrive. So with that, I'm going to start addressing some of the questions that I received from the members of the public and members of council. And so I've kind of consolidated some of them into one or several different groupings. So one of them is, how do we enforce looting? And I think I addressed that already. The next question is, what is the looting risk to the neighborhood across the city? I can't predict what people will or will not do. I can't sit here and say 100% they're not going to go into the neighborhoods. All I can tell you is what our experience has been from New York to Bellevue, down in Austin, into Florida, and elsewhere. We're not seeing these cells going into the neighborhoods. Their intent is to damage the infrastructure of government, and they're going after retail. They want property. They want to steal things so they can go out and sell it on different platforms. One of the things that I heard today that was taken from a email that someone that I know received, basically, and I'm going to put it in a synopsis, that what they know to be fact is that some of the members of these violent, organized criminal enterprises are paid to destroy windows. So for every window they break, they get it equates to a monetary value. And so it's a money-making proposition. Again, not targeting the neighborhoods or the residential area, but staying in the retail business area, and also city government, the seat of government, City Hall, and anything else. And we witnessed that in Seattle over the last several days. They attacked the FBI building. They attacked the King County building. They went after the police precinct house and other government institutions. Another question was, what strategies do we have to prevent looting spillover outside the downtown corridor? There's nothing that I can do to contain them before they get here, to focus them and channel them into the downtown area. We have to respond to where they're going. And I don't know, and I've talked to other police chiefs and asked them this very question: how do we do this? And nobody has any idea how to do this. So if people came into our community and they decided to go to Factoria or Crossroads instead of downtown, you know, we can hopefully gather the intelligence before they get here and take preventive measures, but there's nothing that I can do, to my knowledge, to say and channel them and start pushing them to the downtown corridor. So I'll leave that there. Next question is, how do we ensure we are employing officers to ensure we do not witness an incident in Bellevue like we witnessed in Minneapolis, North Charleston, South Carolina? That was the incident involving Mr. Walter Scott, shot in the back as he ran from a police officer in 2015. And how do our current policies and practices discourage officers from not holding other officers accountable when they demonstrate racial bias? I believe that the answer to the first part of the question is it's in the hiring practices. So we do, I think, a tremendous job in our background investigation. What we hire people who we believe reflect our core values. And our core values are these: respect for everyone, integrity in everything that we do, because we know the public trust can be lost at the drop of a dime. It's something that we earn over time, but can be lost with one mistake or intent. Accountability to everyone. Accountability to the community, accountability to the council, accountability to each other. And service. When my father joined the New York Police Department in 1954, I believe it was, at the top of the training academy, it said, "At your service." Before I became a policeman, he told me, always remember, you serve everybody, you're a servant. And I've taken that and I model that behavior, I hope. And we hire individuals that we think are going to best reflect these core values. They go through the academy, they receive tremendous training. You know, Sue Rohr's done a great job on focusing new recruits on the guardian mentality instead of the warrior mentality. Finding that balance between both, because we are both. When they arrive here in our department, we further that training. We continue training, and we train heavily on use of force and the appropriate uses of force, and not using force that is not justified by the situation that we're dealing with. We are a nationally accredited agency through the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. Not only did we receive and continue to receive and maintain our accredited status, it's not good enough. We want the best that they have to offer. And so we received the gold standard in accreditation. We have to meet in our policies and our practices, best practices in this profession. If we don't get accredited. And then getting the gold standard, not only do we meet the best practices, but we achieve even beyond those best practices, to include things on racial insensitivity, bias, discriminatory practices, use of force, officer conduct, and every operation you can think about with the police department. Another thing that we do, we celebrate and reward the behavior that is consistent with our core values. I established a employee recognition system. So we have Officer of the Year, Sergeant of the Year, Civilian Employee of the Year, and then quarterly awards. All of those awards are designed around our employees who best emulate respect, integrity, accountability, and service. And my presentation is going too long already, but I can tell you story after story after story after story where our officers demonstrate this time and again. We work closely with the larger city team to ensure that our officers are trained in implicit bias. We engage inside the police department with courageous conversation. I leverage our advisory councils to make presentations before patrol briefings and our detectives, so they can hear firsthand how they see things from their lenses and also be able to answer questions that our officers may have. This is to further build the bridges between the police and communities, and specifically communities that are often marginalized and communities of color. Several years back, Chief Covey of the CTAC, who's got 40-something years in the profession, brought to Bellevue my Brother's Keepers training program. And basically, the platform of that training is, okay, you're an officer and something bad happens in front of you. What are you going to do? What are your options? That training is designed to say you have that moral and ethical responsibility to stop an officer that may be intentionally or unintentionally doing something that is way out of bounds. For example, what we saw in Minneapolis. My officers, I have no doubt about it. If they would have witnessed that, they would have pulled that officer off of Mr. Floyd. I'm 100% convinced. And again, I can give you examples where our officers have made mistakes, true mistakes, nothing malicious, and what they did was wrong. And our officers brought it forward. They reported it, not ratting or anything like that, but helping the officer recognize what they're doing is not consistent with our values, the values of the city, and the values of the community. So we can interdict before something terrible happens and bring it to the officer's attention, provide additional training. And in some cases, if I determine that it was intentional and it was hateful, you're fired. And we release them from the police department. The other thing that I think that we do well is I'm promoting people into positions of responsibility that lead by example and model the way. The values that we want emulated throughout the organization, and we hold people accountable to them. There was another question that was asked: what advocacy are our law enforcement leadership and officers engaged in at the county, regional, state, and national levels to reduce racially biased killings at those respective levels? And I'm assuming bias-related killings involving police officers. Our officers work very closely with community members and community groups such as Congregations for the Homeless, Hope Link, Youth Eastside Services, Eastside Pathways. I have officers that are very, very, very involved with the 6 advisory councils to the chief: African American Advisory Council, Latina Advisory Council, LGBTQI, Asian Pacific Islander, Muslim, and an interfaith community. I have officers on each one of those advisory councils. Members of my command staff are associated with or are full members of the Washington Associations of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs, the Police Executive Research Forum, the FBI National Academy Associate, the International Associations of Chiefs of Police, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, King County Chiefs Association, Eastside Chiefs Association, and then again, all of the advisory council. And I'm sure I'm missing many, many other community advocacy groups that help build those relationships and always remind us that we are dealing with human beings, and we will always treat people with respect, dignity, and humanity. And one of the telltale signs that we may have a problem is in the complaint process. When we start receiving complaints for racial profiling, excessive force. Mayor and council, I'm proud to say that our numbers are very, 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 very low. And we investigate each and every one of them. And where I find there is a violation, if we can salvage the officer through training and retraining, we will. If we can't, I fire him. And again, I can tell you in the 5 years that I've been here, those numbers each year are either in the single digits or the low double digits. And the vast majority of them, we find it's been a misunderstanding on the individual that filed the complaint. And again, we prove that through evidence. We prove that through admissions by the person that is making the complaint. And we have experienced oftentimes where the complainant will say, okay, I didn't understand that. Thank you for clarifying this. So moving forward, we're working. I had a conversation this afternoon with Chief Best, Carmen Best in Seattle. We've been in touch quite a bit, as we have with other King County chiefs. We're establishing a multi-jurisdictional investigative task force, which will include the FBI. In fact, the FBI is in Bellevue right now, assisting us with gathering evidence, because we are going to prosecute every person we're able to identify. One of the best things that I think that we have going for us here in Bellevue is that almost every store has video cameras. We have cameras on every traffic pole, I believe, or most traffic poles. We have cameras in other businesses where these cells were dropping off cars and walking into downtown. In fact, and I hope I'm not out of turn, former Mayor Chelmanek saying this, but I've been getting text messages from former Mayor Chelmanek, who has got license plate numbers of individuals we believe were involved in this. So we are going to actively pursue criminal charges on everyone that we're able to identify. We will be encouraging the King County, and we are encouraging the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office to prosecute the people who ravished our community and communities around us to the full extent of the law. We're working with chiefs across the country, like I said, to dissect the tactics that were used across the country to overwhelm police forces so we can ensure that we're able to defeat them. We are right now in the process, as I speak, establishing a system to allow the public to share evidence to assist us in identifying the hundreds of suspects we know coordinated this attack. We have an information line up and running right now, so members of the public can call and ask questions and seek direction, and also provide us information. The number is 425-452-7853. And I'm sorry, I said it's active right now. It's going live tomorrow morning. Again, our officers and our staff are really trying to focus in on if this criminal enterprise is coming back to Bellevue tonight. There is a possibility that that will happen. With that, I think that concludes my presentation. I'm sorry for the length of time that I've taken. There was a lot to share, and I will turn this back over to Mr. Miyake.
Well, Chief Milet, I would just like to speak for the entire council, and I thank you and your force for defending our city last night and every day. Thank you very much for taking the time to explain that and to answer so many questions that people have.
Thank you, Mayor.
So, Mr. Miyake, I think if you do have something else you would like to say.
No, Mayor, I think that concludes the items under the city manager's report this evening.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to council business and new initiatives, we have a council liaison recommendation for appointment to the Planning Commission by Councilmember Jeremy Barksdale. Mr. Barksdale, would you like to make your recommendation?
Thank you, Mayor. As council liaison to the Planning Commission, I recommend Vishal Bhargava to position number 7 of the Planning Commission. He brings qualities that align with the values of our city, the needs in our community, and the interests of the Planning Commission. He's passionate about social and environmental justice and has a strong appreciation for community. He understands the importance of placemaking, enhancing neighborhoods, and the relationship between community and economic development that's necessary for a thriving city. Contributing to his understanding is his past experience with planning commissions and planning departments by way of his professional background in architecture and urban planning, his experience with living in different parts of the country and world, and his engagement with the Bellevue Youth Theater and in his cultural community. Vishal resides in Lake Hills, one of our largest neighborhood areas, where there is currently no representation on the Planning Commission.
Okay. If anybody would like to make a comment or has a question on this, can you let me know right now? Otherwise, just stay silent. Okay, I will take a motion to make this appointment.
I move that we appoint Vishal Bhargava to position number 7 of the Planning Commission.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Terrific. Thank you very much. I'd like to also announce that former Governor Gary Locke is now the interim president for Bellevue College, which is very exciting. So that announcement was made last week. Okay, we have a consent calendar. Deputy Mayor, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The consent calendar passes. And now we have an ordinance 6516 that we need to discuss to pass. And Kathy Gerla, you will be presenting on this, I believe.
I will be.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So good evening, Mayor Robinson and Deputy Mayor Neuenhouse, council members. The next item is Ordinance 6516. And the intent of this ordinance that's before you tonight is to allow board and commission members to actually begin to hold meetings remotely during the COVID-19 pandemic. So Governor Inslee issued a statewide emergency order due to the COVID virus that prohibits holding meetings in person. So any meetings that are subject to the Open Public Meetings Act have to be held completely remotely. That means the board and commission members, as well as the public, all have to participate remotely. The city code currently contains some provisions that prohibit 6 of the city's advisory boards and commissions from holding fully remote meetings. And those specific list of boards and commissions are in the agenda memo. The code prohibits more than 2 members of the affected boards and commissions from participating remotely, and also prohibits any member from remotely participating more than 4 times per year. So given the current state requirements to hold fully remote meetings, these provisions in the code are actually currently prohibiting the boards and commissions from meeting in order to conduct the business that's on their agenda. And they do have some issues currently on their agendas that are important and need to move forward. So the ordinance before you tonight would eliminate the city code restrictions that do prevent the remote participation so that the boards and commissions can start meeting. These same restrictions on remote participation are also in the boards and commissions bylaws, but the boards don't have the authority to suspend the city code, which is why this ordinance is needed. But once the code provisions are lifted, the boards and commissions can temporarily suspend their bylaw provisions, just like the council has been doing to its rules, temporarily suspending the limits on remote participation. And they can do that during the COVID pandemic. And then once that is, whenever period that's over, they would be able to go back to the normal restrictions in their bylaws. So the staff's recommendation is to adopt this ordinance and thereby allow the boards and commissions to start meeting remotely. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask, I'm just sending a picture to Charmaine of the order. Okay, so the order will ask is Councilmember Stokes, Councilmember Lee, Zahn, Robertson, Barksdale, Deputy Mayor Neuenhouse, and me. So starting with Councilmember Stokes, do you have any questions or comments?
No questions. I'm in favor of it and ready to vote.
Thank you. Councilmember Lee. Councilmember Lee, I cannot hear you. Councilmember Lee, I'm going to move on to Councilmember Zahn and come back to you. Councilmember Zahn.
Yeah, my only comment is I'm really glad that we are voting on this because it's been nearly 3 months since we've had boards and commission meetings at a time when we very much need to be coming together and working on the policies and information for our city. So I appreciate this. Thank you.
Councilmember Robertson.
Yeah, I'm supportive of this. I think that it's, am I muted? Can you hear me?
No, I can hear you.
Okay, my thing said I was muted. I'm supportive of this because I think we need to get them meeting again. For example, the Transportation Commission needs to hold a public hearing on the Transportation Improvement Plan so that we can adopt that by the end of June as we're required to under state law. So there's a lot of work that has been held up both at council and on the commission. So I'm glad to see that happen. However, my question is, in removing the limitation, there was a reason that the city council put the limitation on the remote meetings and not having more than 2 people out, etc. And I absolutely understand suspending that during COVID. I think that's very appropriate, or in any other emergency. However, it looks like from the draft ordinance that the plan is to strike all of that. So what is our plan to put that back in after the emergency? And why are we not just putting in a subsection that says, however, the city council during an emergency can waive subsection whatever it was and allow remote meetings? I just am worried if we change it that we may never get around to changing it back. So that's a question for Kathy.
Well, that is certainly a potential option. I think I was not here when these provisions were put in. I think the concern at that time was that there was not consistency between the boards and commissions. And so this language was also put into their bylaws. So they now all actually have consistent bylaws among the boards and commissions that include these same restrictions that are in the code. So I think at the end of the COVID period, the council and the board liaisons from the council could be aware of what the boards and commissions are doing if they chose to make a permanent change to any of their bylaws that somehow got rid of on a permanent basis these restrictions on remote participation. I think the council would be aware of that, and you could choose at that point to decide to come back in and add some restrictions back in the code.
That makes a lot of sense. So the bylaws, which I know were also unified uniform, when they make a vote to waive the bylaws, that's all going to be temporary. That's the plan. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So then we'll fall back on the bylaws. That's a good answer. Okay, great. I'm ready to move forward with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Barksdale.
I support this and I'm ready to vote. Thank you.
Councilmember Lee, are you able to speak to this?
Sure. Mayor Robinson, it's Charmaine. Yep. Councilmember Lee is unmuted, but it appears maybe his hardwire mic on his end is muted.
Oh, I see.
Councilmember Lee, if you can unmute.
Please charge battery. Please charge battery. Please charge battery.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I thought the same way as Councilmember Robertson did, but I think city attorney addressed the answer, the question. Yeah, I think the bylaw of each commission, as long as it for sure restores back the requirement, I think that's a good reason. You don't want to have the commissioners or anybody to routinely, meet, not in person. So I think that's an important consideration. So I'm supportive of this. I'm happy to vote for it, as long as we know that the bylaws is going to, be temporary and remain, the purpose, the original intent of keeping the personal meeting intact. Thank you. Yes.
Kathy, would you like to respond to that, or do you feel like you've already said it?
I think that's the same question as Councilmember Robertson, which is that's exactly right, that these would be temporary suspensions, and once COVID is over, the bylaws would come back into effect and would permanently put back in place these restrictions on remote participation.
Thank you. I'm good.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Newenhouse.
No questions, ready to move forward.
Okay, and I appreciate the opportunity to vote on this. Feels good to be able to proceed and resume these meetings. So is there a motion to adopt?
I move to adopt Ordinance 6516.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Terrific. Well, thank you everybody for a very successful meeting tonight. Appreciate it. And I hope everybody has a good, safe week. Good night. Meeting adjourned.
Good night.
Thank you.